All right, good morning everyone, or good afternoon depending on your location, and welcome to today's webinar, Getting Personal About Personalization. What type of personalization drives the greatest desired response? My name is Steve Jones, Vice President of Marketing here at Corporate Visions, and the only one you cannot see on camera right now, and I'll be moderating today's event. But before we get started, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items so we can make today's event as interactive as possible for everybody on the call today. You've joined the presentation using your computer's speakers by default, but if you'd prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane on the control panel. Feel free to send in your questions at any time during today's event. We'll go ahead and collect those and answer as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Also, as a reminder, following the event, we'll be sending all attendees a recording of today's webinar along with the slides within the next 24 hours or so. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to formally introduce our speakers for today's event. First, our very special guest, Bernie Boris, Chief Marketing Officer at Vengresso, the leader in digital selling solutions, and Tim Reister, Chief Strategy Officer here at Corporate Visions and co-author of the Three Value Conversations. Tim, I believe you're going to go ahead and get us started today, so let me turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Steve. And hey, everybody. Glad to have you here. Yeah, we're excited about this topic. And based on the registration, it looks like this is a hot topic. The idea of personalization. A lot has been said. A lot has been attempted. And the question is, has anybody really studied it in a way that we know that the effort we're putting in is worth the effort? And that's the question we hope to answer today. And I'm excited to be joined by Bernie. Bernie, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself and the company, please.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Tim. I'm also excited to be here and looking forward to diving in. So I'm Bernie Borges. I'm co-founder and CMO at Vengresso, and we are the digital sales transformation company. We help B2B salespeople essentially create more conversations with qualified buyers so that they can create more sales pipeline. And we do that through digital selling strategies that's anchored in relevant content, personal branding, and training and coaching.
So we thought at Corporate Visions, as we did some of this research, we needed a partner who themselves were in the front end of the sales cycle, if you will, the prospecting end of things. So we think this story today is for marketers and salespeople. So I'm going to talk to marketers a little bit first, and Bernie's going to represent some of the sales application because they're on the sales prospecting side of things. But I want to thank my friends at Evergage, Andy Zimmerman, the CMO over there, shout out to them, for this work right here. Basically, this is why I think this is a hot topic, is 98% of you believe that personalization has some level of impact, some positive impact on your marketing work and advancing your customer relationships. And in fact, over half of you believe it has an ultimately super strong impact, but large numbers here at the top that you can see. So what's interesting about this is when there's a strong belief that it has impact, the next question is obvious, but the answer is always interesting. The next question was, so, okay, if it's that important, how satisfied are you with your level of personalization, right? The work you're putting forward in your marketing efforts. And Bernie, only 12% were very or extremely satisfied. So 98% said super important. 12% said we're getting this, we got this, we're good at it. So that tells me there's a lot of help needed, and I think that's why there's so many people registered here today. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and I also think it's worth noting that the 98% who said it's important for them to help advance customer relationships, not just to sell stuff, right? Because in order for anybody to be successful today, we've got to have strong customer relationships. So those are people who are saying we need to be good at personalization to advance customer relationships. I think let's not lose sight of that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So and I think that's important because we're going to talk a little bit today about two particular studies. So what you are going to hear from us today is a study in the area of personal pronoun choice or preference. I use the word preference because it alliterates, but the idea is like, what are you choosing and how are you choosing to address your audience? And in our promo leading up to this, we talked a lot about you're going to hear one little word change that can make a double-digit difference, and that's that first study. And we did it both in the area of email exchanges as well as web page, landing page, sort of longer form content. The second study then is about email personalization, the opening of your email. What generates the most interest, click-throughs, and ultimately meetings established? Is there a difference in the way you personalize your email content in terms of how that actually tracks to success in terms of click-throughs and meetings set? So powerful studies today that you're going to learn about, and why don't we dig right into them? So the first one is a look at the power of the personal pronoun, the choice you make. And to sort of segment this and focus it, the study looked at the word you versus the word we, and whether or not using one or the other would have greater impact in terms of the reaction of your audience. And it turns out it does. That in fact, one little word can make a difference if you simply switch out the pronouns in your communications and your personalization. So we always start with scientific concepts that are already in the literature, have already been studied, and we can find them in the clinical journals, right? But usually those studies have been done by professors who study undergraduates or gamblers or convicts. And so what we like to do is then run additional, now you may think your customers are two of the three there, but we like to take those up a notch and study them in simulation and in real field trials. And today you're going to hear some simulations and some field trials with B2B customers, not just those other easily accessible contained audiences. But the science that exists out there about personalization, there's some old stuff in the area of self-relevance. And basically, if you can get somebody to feel like the thing you're writing is relevant to them, they've been able to demonstrate they will remember or recall that information at a much higher rate. So when it's related to themselves, if they can internalize and go, oh, this is about me, they remember it better. But what's interesting about these studies is none of the studies have been able to show that this greater interest translates into purchase intent, or not even interest, this greater recall. Nobody's been able to show, there are no business-related studies that show greater recall actually leads to greater interest and purchase intent. So self-relevance has been studied in a limited way, and we wanted to take a closer look at that. The other concept out there scientifically is this idea of invoking imagination. If you can get someone to imagine themselves doing something different, doing the thing you're talking about, it begins to move the needle in terms of self-persuasion, which is the most formidable, powerful form of persuasion out there. And there's one experiment in particular in business and sales and marketing that is known as the 1982 cable television experiment. Now, I know like some people on this call weren't even born in 1982, and that's about a point I'm about to make here. But it was performed by the father of persuasion. If any of you have read Influence or now Prefluence by Robert Cialdini, he conducted the study in 82 back when cable television, which was a big thing and a new thing, was being sold door to door by people with clipboards. And in particular, he demonstrated that using the word you instead of the word we could have a greater impact. So what I want to do is take everybody back to circa 1982 selling. And when salespeople dressed sort of like this. Now, my father sold cars
Tim,
for 42 years.
Did you have a tie like that, Tim?
No, my dad did. I was just going to 82. I was not selling yet. But my father sold cars, and he had a tie like that, and I think he still has his coat. But it's 1982. But here's what was happening. Door-to-door sales, people were doing cable television and coming to your door and saying, hey, instead of just getting 3 channels, we can give you hundreds of channels. We've got all this variety. We've got entertainment that you can't even imagine. We can provide you with we. They literally we all over themselves because they were so excited about the product and its newness and how special it was and how different it was. So it was all we phrase. And Cialdini said, you know what, maybe we're missing something here. And he did control tests. And one group, we phrased the benefits and the features and the coolness and the newness and all the great things you could get. And another group, you phrased it. And this was just like one sentence example, but there was a whole script. But the person would say, when you use it, you will be able to plan which of the events offered you wish to enjoy. And so think of it as completely you phrase script versus the we phrase script. And here's what Cialdini found. An amazing, remarkable result. 20% of the people who heard the we phrase description agreed to sign up. 47% who heard the you phrase description agreed to sign up for cable television. So ultimately just one word change and sort of a different perspective change more than doubled the sales in this experiment. Nothing changed. It was still cable television. It was still a door-to-door salesman. It was still all the same stuff except for the message and the pronoun and where the emphasis was. So that was 37 years ago. Bernie,
I think it's also worth noting once again an observation. Even though it was 37 years ago, I don't remember when Dale Carnegie wrote the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, but I know it was a few decades ago. And one of the things he says in his book is that the sweetest word in the dictionary to any one individual is their name. And I don't know if it's in his book, but I would think the second sweetest word is when you make reference to them by you, because it's a pronoun. It's the second thing. It's the closest thing to their name. So from a psychology standpoint, it's intuitive that these findings that are supported by Dale Carnegie's writings.
So it does seem intuitive and it seems obvious when you talk about it. But this study was a long time ago, and we need to study this again. Why? Because this ad here on the right-hand side of your picture is an actual ad for a personal computer from 1982. So bottom line is there was no email, there was no internet. And so in a live interaction, it seems like using the word you really invokes the imagination of the participant. But what about in email? What about in websites? What about in landing pages? And that's what we wanted to study. And so the question we asked people first in a survey was, what are you doing today? So went out to marketers and salespeople like those who are on the call here today and said, what are you doing today? Are you using you phrasing or we phrasing? After all these years and what seems super intuitive, the highest number, 48%, said we phrase. And some, a goodly number said that the word you is often what they choose. Now, what's interesting about this is that the idea of we has migrated. It used to be we've been in business for this many years. We have a great product. We have a great this. Now all the defenders of we phrasing say, you know how we use the word we? We use it in the collective, the partnership, we're in this together. So they defend the use of we under a whole nother banner now, which is trusted advisor, super consultative. We're coming alongside our customers. So when they use the word we anymore, they're trying to justify it in the form of a partnership because it sounds like we are working together and we are in this together. And so what's interesting is after all these years, the majority of the people like Maxwell here are still using the word we. And, but, and all rights to Geico for this is not mine. When we asked them, which one do you think would be more impactful? It was really funny because it's like we gave people a chance to second guess themselves. Just by asking the question, which one do you think would be more impactful? We asked people to process it harder and they started to think differently and they go, And now all of a sudden you see this big shift from 48% we phrasing down to 38 and the majority of the people moving over to you phrasing. So I think it's interesting that there's this tension between what they think is right and what they're currently doing today. And this really needs to be settled. So it's time for a new study. And here's the study we want to share with everybody. We worked with Dr. Nick Lee. He's a professor of marketing at Warwick Business School in the UK. And he's done many studies with us. So his job is to create a reasonable, rigorous, accurate, objective academic study, impanel the would-be buyers, and run the whole study. So there's really no bias from anything that we're doing on our part. And we did two studies. One was, think of it as a cold email. Sent an email to an unsuspecting prospect who had no prior knowledge of the vendor or the product that they were getting the email from. And what we wanted to do is measure the interest level and the urgency that could be created by an email. And the second one was a warm communication. This person had heard of the product and the service and was now going for a deeper lesson by clicking through to a landing page and reading longer form copy content. And again, testing we versus you. So here's what the test looked like. So we paneled 400 would-be B2B buyers, 100 of them randomly assigned to each of 4 test conditions, where the message was created this way. The message in the email had a problem set up. So think of a problem set up and then a solution response. And then they were mixed and matched. So in condition number 1, the problem was set up with you have this problem, you may be experiencing, and we'll take a look at this in a minute. And then the solution was you phrased. In the second condition, some people heard the story as we phrased in the problem and we phrased with the solution. And then for fun, we just tried to mix and match. We did you phrasing of the problem, we phrasing of the solution, and we phrasing of the problem and you phrasing of the solution. So you get 4 test conditions here. And now it's important to see how people responded. Did it make a difference? Or is a pronoun choice neutral and moot? So at a high level, you're going to get these slides, and an ebook that we're going to share with you is going to have this detail. But on the left-hand side is the you phrased email. On the right-hand side is the we phrased email. And it went something like this. Like many business owners, you could be working harder than ever to get to your desired destination. What we're trying to sell here was a business consulting coaching package, about $10,000 for X amount of coaching days and assessment, et cetera. So like many business owners, you could be working harder. The we phrasing was, as business owners, we could be working harder than ever to get to our desired destination. You can see it's not like we phrasing like we're the best. It's we phrasing like, hey, we're in partnership together. So it's a very solid test, I think, from that standpoint. And then as you go on, what made you a winner when you first began your business can lead to failure as you attempt to grow. And over here, it's like, hey, but what made us winners when we first began our businesses can lead to failures as we attempt to grow. So I'm not going to read this whole thing, but you can see in the problem setup, the solution setup, that it went from you phrasing to we phrasing, and we stayed consistent throughout. And it was a test that looked at the way we phrasing is being leveraged today. So some groups read you, some groups read we, and others read a mixture of the two. So what were the results? It turns out that those who read the you phrased email, you in the problem, you in the solution, felt 21% more responsible to solve the problem as stated in the email. Now that's a huge number, because if you think about what you want your initial email to do, a cold prospecting email, you want somebody to begin to feel like they need to take responsibility for this, that they own this, that they need to react, they need to respond, they need to do something. And it turns out if you use the word you instead of we, even in this nice partnership consultative we, you can spike their sense of personal responsibility for the problem by 21%. That in fact, we phrasing, you'll get 21% lower sense of personal responsibility, even though you're trying to make yourself part of the story. The second question, a big question that we asked was, how strongly do you feel you must take action, right? We set up the problem, and in you phrase, they feel 21% more responsible, and they also feel 13% more strongly that they must take action. So the solution you phrased was even more powerful than the rest as well, by double digits. So as you take a look at this, it's very clear that the things you're trying to do with your cold email will be dramatically improved, taking personal responsibility and feeling you must take action on that when you phrase the problem and the solution, and put the customer in a position of imagining themselves struggling with the problem and imagining themselves dealing with the problem, than if you try to use the collective consultative we phrasing. In fact, a couple more questions. We said, how important to your future success is this? People felt what they read was important to their future success at a 9% higher rate. So not as high a number, but here's the thing. Consistently, you phrasing outperformed we phrasing in terms of thinking about it, thinking more deeply about it, having the confidence now to take steps to solve the problem. Hey, there's something here for me. It's engaging. It held my attention. All the things you want to do with an email are more powerful when you use you phrasing versus we phrasing. In fact, our professor, Nick Lee, said you phrasing outperformed we phrasing in every major category, particularly those that are most important to all of us: action and personal ownership. So I'm going to pause there for a second after the first study. Very convincing evidence there.
And Tim, if I want to come back to a comment you made just a moment ago. You said that the reader can imagine themselves in the solution. And you know, Tim, it's been said that people buy a better version of themselves, author unknown. And wouldn't you agree that the you phrasing is doing exactly that? It's framing up a better version of their situation, in a more compelling way than the we phrasing is.
Yeah, you phrasing, by evoking imagination, they put themselves in the story. And we phrasing seems a little ambiguous, a little arm's length. I mean, I know we all think it's kumbaya. We are in this together. But if you think about it, the recipient listening to the word we actually hears the speaker or the company talking when they say we, right? And so even our best intentions for what we want the audience to hear is not accurate. And you're right, exactly, that they put themselves in the story, they take ownership, they try it on, and these are all the good things you want them to do. And so you need to consider, take a look right now, not right now, wait till after this webcast. Take a look at your emails, take a look at, as we're about to talk, your web pages, and look at how often you use the word we versus you. And think about the dramatic impact you could have if you made one simple word change. We're not talking about something hard here that you can't do tomorrow, or something super unscalable. This is like a find and replace. So we give that one to you. So here's what's interesting is this started like a Twitter dialogue. So I got a tweet from Angelina Jaspers, and I asked her permission to share this. She's written a book called Marketing Flexology. And the thing that jumped out at me is she had read the ebook that we put out with you guys, Bernie. And she goes, I found this pretty fascinating, that replacing we with you doubles digits improvements ensue. And she goes, I would have thought just the opposite. So if somebody who's a long-term marketer, having had tremendous success, and an author thinks, I would have thought just the opposite, that means there's others of you out here who have thought just the opposite as well. And in fact, there was somebody else then named Chris here who was like, hey, interesting, responding both to me and to Angelina. Can you provide some insight on the questions and what it sounded like? And I just gave you guys an example. Again, you'll be able to read it in detail later. But before I could even respond, Angelina, who's now all in on this, responds that here's her typical phrasing. She goes, quote, there are things we can do today to increase our business and marketing agility. Again, very partnery, but she knows tomorrow she has to say there are things you can do today to increase your business and marketing agility. It literally is that simple, and I don't want anybody to overthink it. Really just do it, and you will see the difference. And again, if you think it should be something else, I'd love to see your study, but this is what our study told us. So I want to go on to the landing page stuff. Bernie, any other feedback or comments on the email, the prospecting email?
No, I think the imagination point is really, really key. People can imagine themselves in that solution. I'll also add that, we're emotional creatures, so whether we're buying a $50 item or $1 million, solution that has a buying committee of 10 people, there are still emotions involved in that decision. So to the extent that we can message in a way that really gets people imagining themselves in the solution and benefiting from it, that's what I think this data is reinforcing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if it works in a cold email, does it work in a warm follow-up? So think of this as like a landing page. I would argue it also could be seen like a leave behind piece, a 2-pager, like a solution brief or some sort of product detail or solution detailer you might give your customers. So that now the premise is they've raised their hand, they're interested in this concept, and now they're going to read more about it, go deeper on it. So now it's a deeper, warm content piece. And for the sake of a conservative test, so we did the same test conditions. We used just words. We didn't want to do anything different. We just wanted words that people read on a screen. So they read these words on a screen, and the problem and the solution are simply elongated versions of what you saw in the email. I know you can't read this right now, but in the material we send you afterwards, you'll be able to read this example. So it's a deeper dive on the same enterprise business coaching program, expensive sort of consultative sort of solution. And what did we find out? Again, the story that was 100% you phrased in the deeper dive, the web page or the product brief, created 11% higher convincing case to purchase. So what we do is we ask people on a scale of 1 to 9, rate the intensity level of how convincing was the case you just read for you to make a purchase. And they score a number. And so what you do then is compare the intensity ratings, because this is a simulation, to see how intense they are. Now they don't, again, get to see each of the test conditions. They only read one. And then we compare it to the readers of the other. So it's a very conservative test. It's not even like they get to compare the stories and say, I like this one better. They just rate how they feel based on what they read. So it's like an emotional reaction with an intensity score. And what you get is an 11% spike in the case being more convincing to them if you phrase it. And again, in a game of inches, sometimes I'll take 2%, I'll take 5%, I'll for sure take 11% that my case is more convincing to this person to purchase. Then we ask the likelihood of purchase, because it's one thing to be convinced. Then it's like, so how likely are you to do this? Now, remember, we made this a business coaching application that, frankly, this audience could possibly buy. So we're dealing with something that they could think legitimately about buying. And you got a 10% spike in the likelihood of purchasing something like this to help their small business. So again, convincing case and likelihood, same double-digit lift simply by using the pronoun you. And again, some consistencies. Did you find this compelling? How compelling? Rate how compelling. 6% bump. How deeply did you think about the problem? 6% bump. How important is this to the future success of your organization to do something like this? A 5% bump. So again, in the longer copy form of this, our researcher said, based on this research, the simple pronoun adjustment has a material impact on the interest and the propensity to purchase. So the first one had the impact on the person's feelings about owning the problem, needing to solve the problem, and that the offer made some sense. And here it went a step further. And again, 2 for 2 for you phrasing in this email and landing page test that we think corroborates the idea of you phrasing in the verbal conversation for sellers as well. Thoughts or comments, Mr. Borges?
So I think, once again, I don't want to be too redundant. I think it really reinforces the same point over again, and that is, and you mentioned earlier, it's that emotional response. So whether it's a cold email or a warm email, and I would argue that in a warm email, there's even more propensity to make that emotional connection with the recipient. So to the extent that we can appeal to their emotional buying triggers, I think that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah, so you are listening today. You have a choice to make now, and defending we phrasing is harder now after all of these results, regardless of the form of we phrasing that you use. If it's classic "we are the best" phrasing or classic "we are in partnership" phrasing, it fails by significant margins to you phrasing. So we give you that.
Tim,
give you that. Yes.
Tim, sorry, if I could jump in. We're getting a lot of questions here on if you guys could talk a little bit about what the baseline looks like for the study.
The baseline.
The baseline for the slides that you just put up, for the stats you just showed. So 11% over what? Negative 11 over what?
Yeah. So like what you have to do, here's how the math works, right? So I'm going to go back here. They rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 9 for each of these questions. And so this number, the you phrasers rated the convincing case to purchase at, I'm going to guess it's like a 4.8 something. And the we phrasers rated the strength of the case to purchase at like a 4.3 something. And if you do the math, what's the percentage difference between the 4.8 and the 4.3? What the scientists call this is the effect size. There's an 11% difference in terms of the strength or intensity of the effect. So that should answer the question. It's a 1 to 9 scale. People pick a number to rate their intensity, and then we compare the two numbers and look at the percentage difference to identify the effect size. So there's an 11% effect size difference between you phrasing and we phrasing. That should answer the question. And if there's more, I'll take it afterwards. Like, I'm happy to email it. I'm happy to give you my phone number and have this conversation. But that's what it is. 1 to 9 scale. They pick a number, and then we compare the effect size between the two.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks for jumping in. Thanks for clarifying. I don't want people to be struggling to view the significance of the findings. So it's even more important, scientists are telling us. So Zach Termel is one of our other scientists at Stanford. Nick will tell you that scientists are looking more at effect size than even statistical significance, because what they want to see is the magnitude of the difference. And that's what we're looking at here, is effect size relative to the scores that they were given. And again, each one only watched theirs. So they simply picked a number based on intensity. And again, there was 100 in each of these test conditions. And so we then compared them to each other. So good. So 2 simulation studies around using you phrasing versus we phrasing. So would-be B2B prospects looking at this business to business, business coaching consulting thing and seeing what their responses were. The next study we're going to talk about is email opening presentation personalization. And by opening, I don't mean like open rates, but we will talk about open rates. What I'm talking about is the subject line and the opening of your emails and how you personalize those and the effect that those have. And this we didn't do as a simulation. This was done as a controlled field trial, actual emails being sent to actual prospects and looked at over a course of a quarter. And we'll talk more about this in detail. The premise being we wanted to find out how much personalization you need to do. In fact, the question we asked ourselves, the hypothesis was, is there a law of diminishing returns in personalization? And we looked at, there's really 4 ways that things get personalized anymore today. So one is by industry. Let's tailor this by industry and go out to vertical markets. And it will be personalized based on what's going on in your industry. Some people believe you should go a level deeper, personalized by company, the company you're reaching out to. So in ABM, account-based marketing, let's find something out online or however we can about your company and put that in the opening paragraph to show some knowledge and awareness and familiarity with their company and their situation and tie that into our story. Some people believe, as the research shows here, that maybe you need to personalize it, meaning do some work on LinkedIn, do some other Google searching, and find out something personal about the person you're targeting and make a connection that way. Did they used to work at a former client of yours? Do they know somebody in common with you? Did they just change jobs? Did they go to your alma mater? Whatever it is, personalize it to make sure that they have a sense that you've done your homework and you know them. And then the 4th is insert name here. So instead of dear prospect, it's dear Bernie, right? And some people, so the research that we did is in 2 parts. We did an industry survey to find out what are people doing today. And then we did a field trial testing these. And it turns out that when we asked people like you, what kind of personalization are you trying to use in your ABM programs today? 39% said you're attempting to personalize to the prospect level. So let's be honest, that's the harder work here. That's the heavier lift. Find something out about each individual prospect. It better be worth it to do that kind of work because that's hard to scale. That takes a lot of time to do it, find something meaningful, and then tie it in and get it right. 22% said by company and 27% said they personalized by industry. 13% said we're totally cool with just putting their name in there. So then we asked the question, as we always do, which one do you think is most effective? So then we got that tension, just like in the last one. All of a sudden, 39% said this is the way we do it, but 54% said, yeah, but this would be the most effective. So there's a lot of people out there wishing they were doing personalization by the individual they're targeting. And the people that were affected most negatively were those who were personalizing by industry. They like ran away from that. They're like 27% said, yeah, we're personalizing by industry, but shoot, that sucks. We shouldn't do that. And it went down to 10%. And so most of those people obviously migrated to the prospect one, or some of them might have migrated to company. That was 22%, and that went up to 28%. But definitely the people who were personalizing by name only said, not so sure about that strategy. But even more so, the people personalizing it by industry-specific information really didn't seem very confident in that approach. So now what you've got is a large segment of the market saying the more personalization, the more tailored, the better. And it's different from what they're doing today. So that's always worth some research. So what we did, Bernie, is decided to do a controlled field trial. And what you're going to see is that we tested 4 conditions again, and only the opening changed. So think of the emails as going out to cold prospects, super cold, at an ideal client profile. So the client profile matched exactly the size and desired target, and the titles were exactly the same. The solution part of the email was the same. The call to action, like the link and the offering, was exactly the same. The only thing that changed in the 4 test conditions is in one track, we only personalized the opening, the subject line and the opening by the industry. So it was an industry insight, something that we had identified for that industry and experienced in that industry, and we're sharing back to someone who's in that industry. The second was company. Did the research to look up the company, looked at their annual reports and all the online news, press releases, etc., and looked for some angle to tie it into the problem statement and then connect to the solution. In the third and fourth cases, you're going to see we did personalization by person, but we never did it just by person, and here's why. When we did find something personal about somebody, hey, you used to work at a client of ours where you might have experienced our work, or you know somebody in common with us, it was really hard to set up the business problem without actually talking about the problem that would be faced. Because, just because we know you doesn't mean we know for sure you have this problem. So what we did is we personalized the company and personalized the industry. So we took the company approach and the industry approach and added the personal flavoring about the person we were addressing, and then attached to it the problem statement based on company or industry. I hope everybody follows that. We didn't just do a standalone personal only, because we found a huge gap in trying to tie that into the solution. So we needed to tie the personal into a problem somehow that the solution was worth solving. So we thought it was still imminently fair. So here's what we did. If you look at it, 7,000 emails were launched in each of these treatments. So you see the treatment on the left, then you see the description of the treatment, and then you see that controlled emails where the subject line and the opening adjusted based on these different levels of personalization. So 7,000 were sent out, 6,000 were delivered. So we think that's a pretty good number, and it was an even distribution across each of the 4 treatments. So what's interesting is to look at the results. So let's take the average open rate. The average open rate, the clear winners were the more personalized content. So the personal touch, where you talk about the person and as if you know them, in some way have a connection to them, and then you link that to their company and the business problem they might be facing, got the greatest open rates. The second greatest open rates was company only. So definitely people will open things more voraciously if there's something more personal and germane to them. So what's interesting, though, is if you're just measuring based on open rates, and I know some of you are reading ahead of me right now, if you're measuring yourself based on open rates, be careful. I have to tell you, because here's what was interesting. When we looked at open rates, we thought, oh, there's a clear winner. But then we looked at click-through. Who actually clicked through the call to action? Because ultimately, that's a better indicator of interest level and intention, and gives us a much warmer lead to follow up with our SDRs, who then set appointments or meetings, and something dramatically different happened. It turned out that the highest click-through rate was associated with the industry-specific content. And second highest was the industry plus the personal, but it was still lower. So if anything, you got a higher click-through with industry. When you added personal information on it, it got a lower click-through, albeit reasonable. But look at the dive then below that company and personal plus company took. So what I want to look at is percentages. In fact, you get a 17% higher click-through rate with industry-only personalization than if you do company-specific personalization, 17%. But that's not even the most dramatic. You get a 24% difference when you put industry up against personal plus company. So when you start putting personal detail in there, it lowers the click-through rate when you attach it to company and when you attach it to industry. But you get a huge gap here when you do the most, I would call it maximum personalization. Personal information about the person you're contacting attached to something specific about their company to set up the problem. And you get a dive, you take a dive in terms of your click-through rates by 24% versus if you just had given them some industry-based insight only. And Bernie, you and I are going to talk about this for a second, but I want to sort of complete the thought. And then the click-through rate, the second highest click-through rate was when industry was included again, but with personal. But again, you'll see that adding the personal piece didn't help. It actually took it down by 12%. So the winner in click-throughs was actually industry-level personalization, caused more people to click through for the same exact offering. Again, think about it. the call to action was exactly the same. So there was no what we call confounding variable there. The only thing that changed was how we grabbed them with the problem setup. And those who read the industry level problem setup were more prone to click through on the problem solution than those who read the personal stuff. So if you're following your average open rates and confessing and professing some sort of success based on that, you might be unwittingly led astray or lying to your organization about what's most effective, or lying even to yourself about what's most effective, or anybody else you might be telling. Look at click-through rates, because you have to believe that's a better level of intentionality. And proof of that is the results of meeting schedule. So the SDRs now took these leads and called to set meetings. And so this was a mix of SDRs. So this is not skewed by SDR quality. Every one of these had the same group of SDRs working in similar numbers on each of these. So it's not SDR quality that's doing this. The only thing that's different here is what level of personalization was used. And we were able to demonstrate 50% increase in meetings scheduled when industry was the driver of the personalization. And if you add a touch of personal, great. But my point is, you don't suffer any if you don't put the personal piece on. If you just put the industry piece on, you would get essentially the same level of meeting schedule. So if you're measuring average open rates when you should be measuring average click-throughs, when actually you should be measuring how many meetings you actually scheduled, this is far down the funnel or whatever journey you want to talk about. And I think it's probably the farthest you can push this, because after this, different salespeople take over, and it's hard to control for the different salespeople taking this on and what gets said after this. So this is the most controlled we felt for the study. And so, Bernie, I'm going to turn it over to you. This, to me, is somewhat surprising, given that everybody wants to personalize based on personal information, and they were ditching industry level information as a personalization tactic like it was, on fire. Thoughts about the results that we got in this study?
Couple thoughts, Tim. I want to comment on the fact that this example is about account-based marketing, ABM. And the first two words of that, account-based, really are sales related, right? We work with accounts that we're selling to. Then the third word in ABM is marketing. So what we're talking about here is the integration or the alignment between marketing and sales. To your point, if marketing is only focused on measuring open rates, then that's a marketing-centric lens, and that's not a sales-centric point of view. So we really need three things: people, process, and technology. We need the marketing people and the sales people to be collaborating on what are the metrics that are important to sales. We need to put the processes in place in order to measure that. And of course, we need the tools to be able to measure that. So when you bring all those together and then you have the data here to support which personalization works the best, then you can see that through the entire process of marketing aligned with sales on what's moving the needle for sales.
And let's be clear here. This study was done on cold prospects. So this was real prospects in a real database for a real company, and they had never raised their hand before. So this was super, super cold prospecting of an ideal client profile. So imagine at your company now, you've got an ideal client profile, and you've got like 7,000 contacts that you want to reach, and none of them have ever raised their hand before. And you want to crack them because you know they would be a great client if only you could get them, because they match the great clients you already have. But you got zero. You're starting with zero. It's minus 53-degree wind chill with this relationship. And so the question becomes, how do you personalize it to break through? And it turns out that you could spend a lot of cycles developing very specific personal information on that individual contact and getting a high open rate and thinking you did good, only to realize if you look at this, maybe you didn't. And you could spend a lot of time, a lot of cycles doing company-specific information. The reality is, perhaps other than just putting their name in, the easiest thing to do here at scale is industry-level information. And so this made us sit back, right? So it's a bit surprising because it was a bit counterintuitive, but now here sits the data. And so we're like, okay, what could be going on here from a psychological perspective, because that's what we like to study. And so you think about it for a second. What could be going on here? Why do people open but then not follow through when it's super personalized to their company, to themselves? And Bernie, I'm going to speculate, see what you think about this. So here's our speculation, and this is strictly what it is, folks, that People are interested about themselves enough to open something when it's really personal, thinking, hey, what, who, how do they know me? But then they're super skeptical. They're suspicious. Here's why. They don't know you. So when they open it up and realize they don't know you, they're like, oh, they're skeptical and suspicious of you right now. And they kind of see the game that was being played there. They don't know you. And then when you speculate about their company, they go, and not only do I not know you, you don't work here. You're reading public content that we sanitized, but you don't really know what's going on inside my company. And even if you do, and even if it's accurate, there's a level of hubris and suspicion and skepticism that goes with that. But in the case of industry information, so you as a company have some insight about an industry that you're having success with. So you have different clients in that industry. You've seen different things, you've experienced different things, so you can share some insights about what's going on in that industry. Instead of skepticism, now you've activated voyeurism. People want to know what somebody else is doing. They're so busy focused on their own company that there's just like a healthy sort of curiosity that they have about what others in their industry are doing and what they might be missing out on. And again, if you start to tell them a story of what somebody like them sounds like and looks like and what they're struggling with and doing, now they can start to try it on for themselves and go, we're kind of going through that here. So instead of you telling them they've got the problem based on you're looking at their research and looking at online, you're saying, here's what others like you are struggling with, and allow them to begin to put themselves into that story. So just because they profile a certain way doesn't mean they want to believe it. At this point, they don't think they have a problem. They're deniers. If you show them in the opening that others like them are struggling with similar problems, now all of a sudden they might be like, well, I can't believe I've got this licked. So my belief is it's two words: skepticism versus voyeurism. Industry-related content activates the desire to see what others like them are doing. And personal and company-based information means I don't know you and you don't work here, so I'm just a little skeptical of your effort here. That is conjecture, and I'm willing to admit that, Bernie, but I wonder if that isn't what's going on here.
So, Tim, you're admitting that is conjecture, speculation, as you said at the beginning. I'll give you a little bit of data to back that up, so you can thank me later. But in the 2018 State of Sales report from LinkedIn, they report that the number one factor that decision makers look for when considering in talking with a salesperson from a vendor is trust. Number one factor is trust. So what you just said, Tim, is that when it's personalized by the human personalization, there's less of a trust factor there than when it's personalized about the industry. So when you create any kind of concern, the trust wall goes up. When you communicate credible information, that trust factor, the trust wall basically begins to come down a little bit, and there's a higher propensity for some engagement and response.
So I think what you just said is interesting because it's so counterintuitive. I think I've been at conferences where people put up this idea of personalizing it based on what you learn on LinkedIn and on Google, and personalizing it based on what you read in the annual report, telling you this will increase your rapport, this will build trust. And I think it's just the opposite. I think it actually reduces it because you don't know them, you don't work there. How can I trust you when you act so darn familiar? Maybe that's just creepy, not trustworthy. But if you have experience in my industry and you can speak to some things you're observing and things you've done and things that are happening, now you've built trust because you know and see things. In fact, you know and see more people who look like me than I do. So you know what I don't know in my company? I don't know what's going on in my competitors, and I don't know any of those people. And you're telling me you do. Now you've built some trust. It's totally counterintuitive, but I think there are people out there talking about personalization spectrums, building personas and all this stuff, and saying the best way to go is to tailor this by persona. And if not that, company specific, and better yet, by the individual human you're talking to. And they don't have squat to support that. Or if they do, I got to see it because it didn't work here in a big way. And it's only one study. And I am speculating, and I don't even have a dog in this hunt. We're just sharing the results of this because I think it's interesting for the industry to wrestle with this, because every company's wondering how much they need to staff up. How much do you need to scale up? How can you actually sustain an ABM program with such precise personalization by individual and company? It's so hard. Well, guess what? Maybe that effort isn't worth the effort. That's all I'm saying. And that you could get greater results. It'd have been fine if it was even just equal results for less effort so you could get more done. Maybe you get better results for less effort and get more done. That's what I'm offering today.
Yeah, especially when you can do it in a way that is scalable and does end up producing metrics that again are meaningful to sales, as we said earlier.
Yeah, so absolutely. So now I'm going to date myself, right? I think this was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or whatever it was, and Regis would say, "Is that your final answer?" So when I look at the survey, when everybody said we got to do personalization by prospect-specific information, is that your final answer? Do you really? Is that what you want to scale and build to and task your team to and try to sustain? Maybe you don't have to. So with that, Steve, we're going to take some questions. I put this slide up. This is a free report. This is all the examples of the questions and the scripts and stuff we used in those first two studies are in here, and all the detailed results that we talked through are in here. And it's free. This is an ungated landing page. We just wanted to give you a link to go to. So take a picture of it, snap the screen or whatever. Capitalization matters. And get this free report from Vengresso and Corporate Visions as our gift today. We'll also send the slides and the recording out to you, but this is one more tool that you can circulate. Steve, questions from the audience, and thank you for breaking in before to answer that other question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bernie and Tim, and it's some really eye-opening research. And as a marketer, I mean, these are things that now we're starting to implement ourselves internally here at Corporate Visions, and things that we continue to test as well. So really exciting research for all marketers and sales as well. We do have several questions, and just as a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. First question here: to what do you attribute the paradox of what marketers think is more effective in personalization, contrasted by what they're actually doing?
Yeah, Bernie. So we did these surveys together. I'll take sort of a first stab at it. We see this all the time. There's science for this. It's called declared versus revealed preference. Whenever you ask someone, what do you think you should do? What's the best way to do it? They give an answer, and then often that is very different than the way they're doing it. It's almost like there's that natural, we live in that tension all throughout our lives. It's the reason I still drink Diet Coke. There's just that natural tension between what we know to believe and believe to be right and what we want others to think we're kind of doing versus what we're actually doing. So I attribute it to that's just social science, and it's there every time we do these kinds of studies between what people think is right and what they do. It's just an interesting tension we live in.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll add, Tim, is that I think sometimes people do kind of press the easy button and do things that are easier to scale and aren't necessarily doing the rigorous research to determine, what's producing the best results. Even though we all have analytics available to us, it doesn't mean that we're all using them to the degree that we can and should be doing in order to really determine what's producing the best results.
Yeah, I think the irony in this last one is people were like potentially over-engineering when they could have done less. That's the counterintuitive finding in this last one. That's rocking my world a little bit. Steve, any more?
Yeah. Next question here regarding the you versus we research. Was that done exclusively with North American culture, or has there been any type of testing with European, Asian, or Latin American cultures?
So that was done with Nick Lee, and Nick is out of work in the UK. And the database that he pings is at a minimum European and US, I know to be a fact. So at a minimum European and US. The thing about social psychology and behavioral science and even neuroscience in marketing and sales is that it sort of neutralizes geographical differences. So many of the studies we see in the clinical journals being done now are being done in China and India because it costs less to get more people involved, and they require less money for incentives to participate in studies. So they do them in China and India, and they then purport the results to be true for all humankind. So the deep science about how decisions are made in the brain says the way the brain formulates and makes decisions, because so much of it happens at a subconscious, emotional, intuitive level, is exactly the same regardless of geography, because people will tell us it's different because they want to think it's different. But the problem is we don't have access to the part of our brain that makes this decision, so we can't actually explain it. So we just want to logically say it's different because I think people think it feels better to say it's different. And while there's differences, I think in terms of interactions with people, how the brain processes stuff is still the same. So this is one of the neat things about these studies is we think they're globally applicable and timeless in nature. But this one in particular had at least at a minimum a European and US database involved.
All right, very good. Next question here. Direct mail for the you versus we research. Would you say that the same findings would hold true in direct mail as it does via email?
So I'm going to say yes. We didn't test it. So whenever I speculate, I'll admit I'm speculating because we only tested electronic copy, but they read the copy. So they're looking at a screen, reading this copy. I don't think reading the copy on the screen is all that different from reading it in an email, in a hard piece of mail. So I was a betting man. If I was a betting person, I would go with you phrasing regardless of the circumstance. I would you phrase my speeches and presentations. I'd you phrase my, I'm just going to you phrase everything.
I agree, Tim. And, in our promotion for the webinar, one of the things that we said is that the audience for everything we covered here today is not just marketers, but also salespeople. Because salespeople, to quote you, Tim, have their lips moving in front of prospects and customers. They also have to produce proposals and send emails themselves. So whether the medium is hard copy, print, direct mail, or a face-to-face conversation, we're still talking about human communication and the emotional trigger in the brain that the science supports that you phrasing is more effective than we phrasing.
All right, fantastic, Bernie. Next question here. Is you the same as your? Here's an example. ABC company has the right value proposition to enhance your UC&C experience while stretching your budgets.
Yes. Yep, it is. As opposed to we have and we help and we'll stretch. You and your, I would say, are yours a fine version of you.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, next question. Do you think the same results?
Wait, no, Steve.
Yeah, no worries.
That didn't make that statement you phrased because it started with we. It talked about them. Just so you know, that wasn't actually a you phrase statement. It would have to be you're going to experience this when you do this differently with this. You can't say we bring this. You can't say this. Our company brings value, so it helps your this. You've already rephrased it. You've already lost them. You're talking about yourself. So this is how careful you have to be. Is you need to look at it and make sure that it's you phrased throughout, so that they are seeing themselves doing the thing, doing something different, not just responding to the we at the beginning of that statement. If I heard it right, that was actually a we phrase statement. Your is fine, but it might be too late at that point because you talked about yourself at the beginning. So it's a little bit tricky. It takes a little bit of practice, but try to talk about what you will experience, what you will learn, what you will do different. That's how that has to be described.
All right, I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question here as we're at the top of the hour, but I think it's an important one. Do you think the same results for you hold true for I? We've written a lot of copy with the idea of appealing to voice search. Example, bullet points that say, how do I get my license? What courses do I need? Consider trying to change these to you to see if it makes any difference.
We didn't test that. It's worth a test. And I think what you're saying is when people read it, they almost say it out loud in their head, right? And they're saying, what do I need versus what do you need? I think it's, I would test it. I would do some, excuse me, if those were bullet points in an email, I'd do some with I and do some with you and see what you get. But thank you for the idea. I do not have a scientific answer for that. I would say it's much closer to you phrasing. It's much closer to you phrasing. And now I'm going to go research the science out there to see if there's a lot of eye phrasing, because you make a good point.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Bernie and Tim, and really thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. There were a lot of questions today, so if we were unable to get to your question during the event, we'll certainly do our very best to answer each question individually after the event via email. So on behalf of Bernie, Tim, and myself, thank you so much for joining us today, and please have a great rest of your day. Thank you.